The entire restaurant held its breath. Silvio Valdrenza, the semi-retired patriarch of New York's most ruthless crime family, had just been dragged through the door. Bloodied, bound, and held at gunpoint by men in tactical gear. The staff thought this was a robbery. The patrons who recognized the silver-haired captive knew better. They were witnesses, and witnesses don't survive. But the young waitress, Elira, didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she walked straight toward the armed men and spoke to the captive Don, not in English, not in Italian, but in Odesky, an extinct Ukrainian-Russian criminal dialect that hadn't been spoken in the New York underworld for over 30 years. The room went ice cold. The lead captor's finger twitched on the trigger. In that moment, everyone realized this wasn't just a waitress. That she was a ghost from a family the Valdrezas had erased from existence, and somehow, impossibly, she was the only one who could save them all. The dining room of Cristallo, Manhattan's most aggressively upscale fusion restaurant, smelled of black truffle foam, dry-aged ribeye, and the metallic tang of barely concealed fear. "Move! Move! Move! If those wine glasses aren't spotless, I swear I will throw you into traffic myself." Raymond, the head maitre d', was a man conducting his own personal symphony of panic. He dabbed at the perspiration gathering along his temple with a monogrammed handkerchief, his eyes ping-ponging between the antique clock above the bar and the double glass doors that opened onto Fifth Avenue. It was 8:47 p.m. The Valdrenza reservation was for 9 o'clock. Elira Kosloff adjusted the ties of her apron, keeping her head down, her shoulders rounded in the posture of someone who'd spent 8 years learning to take up as little space as possible. She hated nights like this. Elira had 3 rules for survival: never make eye contact, never ask questions, and never, ever let anyone remember your face. She'd been perfecting the art of invisibility for 8 years now, ever since she'd crawled out of the burning wreckage of her family's Brooklyn estate, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a new name stitched together from a dead woman's social security card. Elira Kosloff was gone. In her place was Eli Kowalski, a Polish immigrant with a tragic backstory vague enough to discourage follow-up questions and sympathetic enough to explain why she never went to company happy hours or accepted friend requests on social media. She worked 3 jobs because one employer meant one set of coworkers who might get curious. 3 meant she was always arriving or leaving, always too tired for small talk, when always just out of reach. Tuesdays and Thursdays, she cleaned luxury condos in Tribeca, invisible to residents who never looked at the help. Weekends, she hostessed at a midtown steakhouse where Wall Street bros were too self-absorbed to notice the woman seating them. And Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights belonged to Cristallo, where the clientele paid $1,000 a head to be seen and never bothered to see anyone else. It was perfect. It was killing her. She tied her apron strings for the 3rd time, a nervous habit she'd developed to keep her hands busy. Around her, the pre-service chaos reached its crescendo. Servers polished already pristine stemware. The sommelier adjusted his tie in the reflection of a champagne flute. Raymond stood at the entrance like a general preparing for siege, checking his watch every 45 seconds. "Does anyone know if the Valdrenzas have dietary restrictions?" Someone whispered near the kitchen doors. The question landed like a stone in still water. "Don't." Raymond's voice was sharp. "Don't say that name louder than a breath. And no, we seat them, we serve them, we smile, and we do not ask questions." Elira's hands stilled on her apron. Valdrenza. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. Before that, it had been everywhere. Whispered in the kitchens where she worked, murmured in the bodegas where she bought groceries at midnight, breathed like a curse in the Russian bakeries of Brighton Beach, where old women still remembered the wars. The family that ran New York. The family that had buried hers. "I heard Aurelian Valdrenza himself is coming," a young server said, and his voice cracking with nerves. "The son, the one they call—" "Enough." Raymond's face had gone gray. "Treat them like any other reservation. Premium service? Zero conversation. And for God's sake, do not stare." Elira forced her breathing to steady. She picked up her tray of water glasses, checking her reflection in the polished silver. Same tired eyes. Same forgettable face. Same ghost. She could do this. She'd been doing it for 8 years. The doors would open. She would serve. She would disappear. Just like always. The doors didn't open. They exploded. 3 men in black tactical gear kicked through the entrance at 8:53 p.m., 7 minutes before the Valdrenza reservation. The first thing Elira registered was the weapons, Glocks, held low but ready. The second thing was the blood trailing across Cristallo's white marble floor. The third thing was the man they dragged between them. Silver hair plastered to his skull with sweat and gore. Expensive suit torn at the shoulder. Hands zip-tied behind his back. But his spine was straight, his jaw set, and when his eyes swept the dining room with the cold assessment of a predator, Elira's breath caught in her throat. Silvio Valdrenza, the lion of Brighton Beach, the man who'd built an empire before his son inherited it. The old guard, they called him. A relic of the days when the family still followed codes, and still honored blood debts, still killed you to your face instead of with car bombs and poison. The man who'd given the order to eliminate the Kozlov family 8 years ago. "Nobody moves. Nobody dies." The lead enforcer's voice boomed through the restaurant. He was built like a linebacker, his Chicago accent thick as concrete. Sartori Crew, Elira realized, the Midwest outfit that had been pushing into New York territory for months. "This is between us and the Valdrezas. You're all just scenery." Raymond had gone corpse white. 2 servers dropped their trays. The crash of shattering crystal seemed obscenely loud in the suffocating silence. The enforcers shoved Silvio into a corner booth with a view of the entire restaurant. A calculated choice. Everyone could see him. Everyone could see what happened to lions when they got old. Elira's hands tightened on her water tray. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to become wallpaper the way she'd trained herself. This wasn't her fight. This wasn't her family anymore. But Silvio's eyes found hers across the room. For half a second, their gazes locked. His were pale gray, sharp as winter ice, and impossibly calm. He wasn't looking at her like a victim looks at a bystander. He was looking at her like a soldier recognizes another soldier. Someone who understood the field, who knew the rules, who could see the angles. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch. A question. A test. "Who are you?" The lead enforcer was barking into a phone, demanding Aurelian's location, throwing threats like grenades. His partners flanked Silvio, fingers on triggers, eyes scanning for threats. None of them were watching the waitress. Elira set down her tray. Her legs moved before her brain could override them. She walked toward the booth with her head down, her posture subservient, a water pitcher in her shaking hands. "Sir," she said in accented English, the voice of a frightened immigrant. "Water?" The enforcer waved her off without looking. She set the glass down anyway, leaned in close enough that only Silvio could hear, and spoke in a language that had died with her family. "Stary lev, tvoya krov ще ne ostila." Old lion, Your blood is not yet cold. Silvio's eyes widened. The entire restaurant turned to stone. The lead enforcer's head snapped toward her. What did you just say? Elira's face remained perfectly blank, her eyes downcast. I ask if he wants water, sir. I'm sorry. My English... That wasn't English. His hand moved toward his weapon. What language was that? Polish. She lied, her accent thickening. I only try to be polite. Get the hell out of here. He grabbed her arm, shoving her back toward the kitchen. She stumbled, caught herself, bowed her head in apology. But Silvio had heard. Silvio had understood. And Silvio was smiling. The enforcers made their calls. They barked demands into phones, threatening Aurelian's associates, negotiating terms for the old man's life. They ordered the staff into the kitchen, all except 2 servers they kept in the dining room as additional leverage. Raymond looked like he might faint. The sommelier was praying under his breath. Elira stood near the kitchen doors, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd broken her first rule. She'd been seen. 8 years of careful invisibility, shattered in 5 words. But she wasn't done. She watched the enforcers through the service window, watched their patterns. The leader was on the phone constantly. The second man paced near the entrance, checking the street. The third stood behind Silvio, gun pressed to the old man's spine. Standard intimidation formation. Textbook. Predictable. She folded a cloth napkin with swift, practiced movements. Her father had taught her this technique when she was 12. How to conceal a blade in linen. How to carry death disguised as hospitality. She'd assumed she'd forgotten. Muscle memory, it turned out, didn't care about amnesia. The paring knife from the prep station was 4 inches of carbon steel. She wrapped it in the napkin, creating a rose fold that hid the weapon in decorative fabric. Then she loaded a small tray with water, olives, and the folded napkin. I bring food, she called out in broken English. The gentleman, he looks pale. Maybe he needs... I said stay in the goddamn kitchen. Please, sir, just water and small food. He is old man. If he dies before your boss comes, you get nothing, yes? The logic landed. The leader swore, but jerked his chin in permission. Elira approached the booth, set down the tray, placed the water glass, and laid the folded napkin directly beside Silvio's bound hands. Their eyes met. He saw the weight of the fabric, felt the outline of what lay hidden inside. His smile widened. Koslov, he breathed in Odeski. Impossible. Not yet, she whispered back. Silvio moved at exactly 9:17 p.m., the moment the lead enforcer turned his back to argue with whoever was on the other end of the phone. The old man's hands had been working the zip tie against the hidden blade for 3 minutes. When it snapped, he didn't hesitate. His right hand shot up, grabbed the gun barrel pressed to his spine, and twisted with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man his age. The enforcer behind him gasped as his own weapon discharged into the floor. Silvio used the momentum to slam the man's head into the table. The crack of skull against marble was sickening. The dining room erupted into chaos. The second enforcer at the door spun, raising his weapon, but Silvio was already moving. He kicked the table outward like a battering ram, sending plates and crystal exploding across the floor. Patrons screamed. Servers scattered. The lead enforcer dropped his phone, reaching for his Glock. Elira threw the water pitcher. It wasn't a perfect throw. Her father would have been disappointed. But it caught the enforcer across the temple with enough force to stagger him. In that half-second of confusion, Silvio was on him, driving the paring knife into the soft tissue beneath his jaw with surgical precision. The man dropped without a sound. "Kitchen! Now!" Silvio's voice cut through the screaming. His eyes found Elira's. "Move, girl!" She didn't think. She ran toward the kitchen doors, Silvio right behind her. Behind them, the remaining enforcer opened fire. Bullets punched through glass, splintered wood, sent servers diving for cover. They crashed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The staff was already fleeing out the back exit. Elira grabbed Silvio's arm, steering him past the prep stations toward the delivery entrance. They were 10 feet from freedom when the third enforcer kicked through the door. He was younger than the others, wire-thin and quick. His gun came up fast, centering on Silvio's chest. "End of the line, old man." Elira didn't hesitate, didn't think, didn't allow herself to remember that she'd promised herself she was done with this life. She grabbed a sauté pan from the still hot burner and hurled it at his gun hand. He jerked aside, trained reflex, but it left his center exposed. She closed the distance in 3 steps, moving with the fluid economy of motion her father had drilled into her, until it was as natural as breathing. Knee to the solar plexus. His breath exploded out. Hand to the wrist, forcing the gun barrel away. Then the killing blow, palm strike to the throat, delivered with enough force to crush his trachea. The technique had a name in Odeski, Tykasmert, the quiet death. He dropped, clutching his ruined throat, unable to scream. Silvio stared at her, then at the dying man, then back at her. "Maxim's daughter," he said, not a question. "I watched you die." "You watched me burn," Elira corrected. She grabbed his arm again. "We need to move, now." The SUV that arrived 12 minutes later wasn't marked, but Elira recognized a Valdrenza vehicle the way other people recognize their own reflections. Bulletproof glass, reinforced doors, 2 men in the front who moved with military precision. Silvio had made a call from a burner phone he'd retrieved from the restaurant's office safe. Apparently, the old Don kept emergency resources stashed in half the establishments in Manhattan. He'd spoken rapid Italian, his tone brooking no argument, while Elira stood in the alley behind Cristallo and tried not to think about the man she'd just killed. Her hands weren't shaking. That was worse somehow. "Get in," Silvio said. Not a request. She climbed into the back seat. He slid in beside her. The doors locked with an automated click that sounded like a prison cell closing. They drove north through Manhattan, then across the bridge into a part of Long Island where the properties had gates and the gates had guards. The compound appeared after 20 minutes, a sprawling estate that looked like old European money trying to pretend it wasn't new American violence. Elira had been here once before. She was 7. Her father had brought her to a summit, back when the Koslov and Valdrenza families were negotiating territory. She remembered marble fountains and men in expensive suits who smiled without warmth. She remembered Silvio teaching her how to play chess in a sunroom while the adults talked. The SUV stopped at the main entrance. The guards who opened the doors had their hands near their weapons, but Silvio raised a palm. "She's with me." "A guest protocol." One of the guards, a man built like a concrete barrier, frowned. "Sir, she just killed 2 Sartori soldiers. We need to process. She saved my life." Silvio's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "She speaks Odeski. Do you understand what that means?" The guard's expression shifted from suspicion to something like fear. "Inside," Silvio continued. "Guest room in the East Wing. Not the holding cells, not the interrogation suite, a guest room with proper accommodations." They walked through doors that probably cost more than Elira had earned in 8 years. The interior was exactly as she remembered. all old-world craftsmanship and new-world security. Cameras in the crown molding. Pressure sensors beneath Persian rugs. Beautiful and deadly. Staff appeared from nowhere, silent and efficient. A woman in a crisp black suit gestured toward a sweeping staircase. "This way, miss." The guest room was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. A 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a museum. An ensuite bathroom with marble everything. The woman laid out fresh clothes. Expensive, the right size. Someone had made calls. "Mr. Valdrenza requests you join him for a late dinner in 1 hour," she said. "You're free to decline, of course." The lie was polite. They both knew Elira wasn't free to do anything. "I'll be there," Elira said. The woman left. The door closed with a soft click. Elira walked to the window and looked out at the fortress she'd once called enemy territory. Her family had owned an estate like this. Smaller, but just as fortified. Aurelian Valdrenza had burned it to the ground. Elira didn't make it to dinner. Aurelian Valdrenza arrived 30 minutes early, kicked open the guest room door, and had a gun to her head before she could turn from the window. "Don't move." His voice was nothing like his father's. Silvio spoke with the measured cadence of old power, authority earned through decades. Aurelian's voice was cold precision, a scalpel instead of a sword. Elira raised her hands slowly, met his eyes in the reflection of the window glass. She'd seen photographs. Surveillance footage her father had kept in his office. But nothing had prepared her for Aurelian Valdrenza in person. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, maybe? Tall, lean, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than a car. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so utterly devoid of warmth. He looked like mathematics made flesh. Cold equations and calculated risks. The man who'd ordered her family's execution had been 27 years old. "Turn around, slowly." She obeyed. The gun didn't waver. His finger rested on the trigger with professional familiarity. "My father says you speak Odeski." "I do." "My father says you saved his life." "I did." "My father," Aurelian continued, his tone never changing, "says you're Maxim Koslov's daughter, the one who died in the fire 8 years ago." "I got better." His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, the gun still trained on her forehead, and studied her face with the intensity of someone analyzing a counterfeit bill. She watched him catalog her features. The sharp cheekbones, the angular jaw, the pale gray-green eyes that every Koslov had carried like a genetic signature. She saw the exact moment recognition hit. His hand tightened on the weapon. "Your eyes." "My father's eyes," she confirmed. "You'd remember them. You were close enough to see them when you put a bullet in his head." Something flickered across Aurelian's face. Too fast to name, gone before she could identify it. "You should be dead." "So should your father." Funny how the night worked out. For 10 seconds, neither of them moved. The gun barrel pressed cold against her skin. His breathing was controlled, his expression unreadable. Then he lowered the weapon. "Dinner," he said flatly, "is in 20 minutes. You'll sit to my right where I can see your hands. If you reach for anything sharper than a butter knife, I'll kill you before you finish the motion." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. An invitation and a threat. The dining room could have seated 30. Tonight, it held 3. Silvio sat at the head of the table, freshly bandaged and composed, as if he hadn't been held hostage 4 hours ago. Aurelian took the opposite end, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. Elira sat to his right as instructed, her hands visible on the white tablecloth. Staff served the first course in silence. Burrata, with heirloom tomatoes. Wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The absurdity of it made her want to laugh. "Tell me," Silvio said, breaking bread with steady hands. "How does a dead girl learn to kill like her father?" "Muscle memory," Elira replied. "Turns out you don't forget how to break a man's throat just because you change your name." Aurelian hadn't touched his food. "Where were you? After?" "In the woods behind the estate. My father shoved me out a window when your men breached the east wing." She kept her voice level, clinical. "I watched from the tree line, counted the gunshots. 16 for the guards, 3 for my uncles, 1 for my father." Her eyes locked on Aurelian's. "You made him kneel first. Professional courtesy, I suppose." His expression didn't change. "He knew why. Because he was moving heroin through your ports without permission," Elira said. "Because he got greedy. Because he forgot that the old code still mattered to families like yours." "He endangered children," Silvio interjected quietly. "His shipments went through school zones. When we asked him to reroute, he refused. When we gave him a deadline, he expanded operations." Elira's hands tightened on her wine glass. "I know what he did." "Do you?" Aurelian leaned forward slightly. "Because you're sitting here eating our food instead of putting a knife in my throat. That suggests you understand the difference between murder and execution." "I understand," she said, "that my father broke the rules, that he chose profit over code, that he died for it." She paused. "I also understand that I was 15 years old and not supposed to be there that night. Your orders were to wait until I returned to boarding school." Silvio's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Aurelian's jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to be home." "Spring break came early." Her smile held no warmth. "Bad timing. Story of my life." "We looked for you," Silvio admitted. "After. When we realized you'd escaped. We searched for weeks." "I know. I was very good at hiding." "You were a child," Silvio said, something almost like regret in his voice. "You should never have seen what you saw." "But I did." Elira set down her glass. "And now I've saved your life. So tell me, Aurelian Valdrenza, what exactly happens next?" A man in a tactical vest entered the dining room without knocking. He whispered something to Aurelian, who stood immediately. "Conference room, now!" Silvio rose with effort. Elira started to stand, but Aurelian held up a hand. "You too. You're already neck-deep in this." The conference room was all glass walls and digital screens. A dozen men in suits were already assembled, their expressions ranging from anxious to furious. They fell silent when Aurelian entered. "Show me." A man Elira didn't recognize pulled up security footage on the main screen. "This is from our Newark port facility, 2 hours ago." The video showed a warehouse, men loading shipping containers. Then an explosion, white-hot and devastating. The screen went dark. "Sartori crew hit 3 of our operations tonight," the man continued. "The port, the construction site in Queens, and the cash house in Brooklyn. Coordinated strikes, professional execution." "Casualties?" Silvio's voice was granite. 17 dead, 9 wounded." Aurelian's hands flattened on the table. "How did they know the locations?" "That's the problem." Another man, older, with the cautious demeanor of a career accountant, stepped forward. "These weren't public facilities. The cash house in particular. We moved it 3 weeks ago. Only senior leadership knew the new location." The room went cold. "Someone talked," Aurelian said quietly. "Or someone's been watching you for months." Elira spoke without thinking. Every head turned toward her. She ignored them, focusing on the tactical details displayed across the screens. Look at the timing. They grabbed your father at exactly 8:53. Your port exploded at 9:15. Or Brooklyn at 9:22. Queens at 9:28. She pointed to the timestamps. Staggered intervals. Maximum chaos. Minimum response time. That's not improvisation. That's choreography. Aurelian studied her. You're saying they planned this? I'm saying they've been inside your organization for weeks. Maybe months. She moved closer to the screen, examining the explosion footage. That blast pattern, shaped charges, placed for structural collapse. And the kidnapping wasn't meant to succeed. It was theater. Theater? A distraction. Keep your father in public. Tie up your resources responding to the hostage situation while they hit your real assets. She turned to face the room. This is phase 1. They're softening you up, testing your response times, identifying your weaknesses. Silvio leaned heavily on the table. How do you know this? Because it's Kozlov doctrine, Elira said flatly. My father wrote the playbook they're using. Someone's teaching the Sartoris our old methods. The accountant pulled up financial records next. We've been tracking unusual fund transfers. Small amounts, but frequent. Someone's been siphoning money to offshore accounts for 6 months. Let me see the transaction codes, Elira said. Aurelian's eyes narrowed. Why? Because if they're using Kozlov methodology, they're using Kozlov communication protocols too. She moved to the screen, scanning the alphanumeric strings attached to each transfer. Most were standard banking codes, but 3 stood out, longer sequences that didn't match any conventional format. Her father had been paranoid about electronic surveillance. He'd created a cipher based on old Ukrainian folk songs, encoding messages in what looked like random transaction data. She grabbed a marker, wrote the 3 sequences on the whiteboard, and began extracting every third character. Vini delivers March 5th. The room erupted. Vinny the butcher? Silvio's voice cracked like a whip. He's been with us for 15 years. He's been with the Sartoris for 6 months, Elira corrected. She pulled up another screen, cross-referencing dates. March 5th was when your construction site deal went public. Vinny was the only person outside your inner circle who knew the terms. Aurelian was already moving, barking orders into his phone. 2 men left immediately to secure Vinny's location. Silvio lowered himself into a chair, suddenly looking his age. How did you break that code so quickly? My father made me memorize it when I was 10. Elira set down the marker. He said information was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. Aurelian ended his call and turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd entered the room. You just saved my organization from collapse. I saved myself from getting killed in the crossfire. Regardless. He moved closer, his expression unreadable. Under the old codes, I owe you a blood debt. My father's life, my empire's security, name your price. Elira met his gaze. 8 years of hiding. 8 years of being small and forgotten and safe. 8 years of surviving instead of living. I want in. Silence. In? Aurelian repeated. Your organization is compromised. The Sartoris have my family's playbook and the resources to use it. You need someone who thinks like a Kozlov. She stepped closer. And I need what you took from me. Power. Protection. A name that means something again. You want partnership, Silvio said slowly, with the family that killed yours. I want partnership, Elira corrected, with the family that can help me destroy the Sartoris. What I do after that? She looked directly at Aurelian. We'll negotiate. Aurelian studied her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Welcome to the family business, Miss Kozlov. She took his hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm. It's Elira, she said. If we're going to war together, you should at least know my name.